So far in this series, we've been looking at the many reasons why it is that Jesus always seems to come in a storm. We've discovered that he always has a plan for us in the storm. He's never deterred by the storm, and he expects us to grow our faith in the storm. And most importantly, our response is not only to call the shot, he's waiting for us to take action. This morning, we'll look at a couple more things to consider when we find ourselves in the midst of a storm. Hi, I'm Pastor Tom, and after a few days in Phoenix playing golf in the sun with a little bit of sunburn, I come home and shoveling snow, only in Colorado. Anyway, we're back at it with part 3 of our series, Why is it always in a storm? And this morning we're going to take a look at 2 more important facts about why Jesus always comes in the storm. Now first we need to remember that it's the Lord's timing. Now if we want to experience the power of God's salvation, we have to step out in faith, but that doesn't mean we're to disengage our brain. Haven't we taken that step too quickly a time or two, only to find ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time? Now as the egg drips off our nose, we lift our eyes to the Lord and get that look from him that says it all. I didn't say now. Just like Peter, we need to be ready to go, but only after we hear the Master's command to come. Only then can we act in total faith and, like Peter, walk on the surface of our circumstances. Now, every member of the bride of Christ has been born again from above, and therefore has been enabled with the power to walk on this earth with impunity. We're kept from being overwhelmed by it or sinking into it. Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Ephesians 2:5 and 6. Even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised up with him, and seated with him in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. But just like Peter found out, being enabled doesn't necessarily mean being immune. Matthew 14:30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. The Lord's calling in the midst of the storm always comes in his timing, and his timing is always perfect. That's why we need to anticipate and be ready to hear and respond, especially in the darkest part of the storm. But just following Jesus isn't enough. Now, Peter answered the Master's call and stepped out in faith. Matthew records that he was walking on the water. But as we all know, he took his eyes off of Jesus and put them on his circumstances. He was fine as long as his eyes didn't leave the Savior's. Now, David recognized this fact in his life on many occasions. Psalm 63:7 and 8. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. The key is found in the first part of verse 7. For you have been. Now, Peter, like David, was responding to Jesus' challenge based upon past history. Jesus had never gone back on his word before, and Peter didn't expect him to do so on this occasion. But had he just kept that initial level of faith, he would never have let the circumstances take control. Now, that's the interesting part that is so strongly ministers to me. Just walking after Jesus isn't enough. Look at all the followers that were only that, simply followers. When the going got tough, they quit and walked away. Why? Because they just walked after him, looking to the miracles and what Jesus could do for them. They never got to know him on a personal level so that they could trust him and to see them through the dark storms of life. Many just wanted more bread and fish. And sadly, that hasn't changed much today. Now, David knew he could call upon and trust the Lord, his God, because Jehovah had proven himself faithful on previous occasions. Likewise, Peter knew that if Jesus told him to come, he was going to be able to walk on the water. It was only when he closed his spiritual eyes and once again looked at the circumstances with his natural eyes that he was overcome. And note that it was his choice to walk or sink. It all came down to his faith in the word of Jesus. Now digress for a moment and listen to Peter a few years later. 1 Peter 1:5 and 8. who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it's tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory. Do you think Peter may have been reflecting on this particular night when he wrote the above? But at the moment in question, he completely forgot the events of his previous boat trip with the Master. Remember Matthew 8:26 and 27. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the wind and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him?" However, at that moment he was overwhelmed with fear, and his thoughts were clearly focused on the sea that was about to swallow him up. At that moment his action was the only correct one. He cried out, "Lord, save me." We find ourselves in Peter's sandals. We need to keep his example in mind. He did the only right thing. He cried out to Jesus for salvation. When our faith is weak, we need to cry out in prayer to the one who's been watching and waiting for us to call. Unless we've been in Peter's situation and find ourselves sinking into the darkness, we'll never truly cry out in deep faith. Once again, listen to the words of David, the man who was after God's heart. Psalm 18:4-7. The cords of death encompassed me. The torrents of destruction assailed me. The cords of Sheol entangled me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called upon the Lord. To my God I cried for help. From his temple he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked. The foundations also of the mountains trembled and quaked, because he was angry. So our challenge this week is to be proactive in the midst of the storm and look for the Lord's calling and discover his plan for us in the midst of that dark storm. We need to be prepared to step up to the challenge of strengthening our faith and step out of the boat, trusting him when he calls. Now next week in part 4, we'll look at what Jesus is waiting for while we're struggling in the storm, stuck in the boat of our circumstances. Now thanks for joining us here each week, and if you haven't subscribed and liked us, please do and share these weekly videos to help us get the message out to the bride of Christ, to look up in the midst of her storm and set her eyes on Jesus and step out of the boat, having faith that he will always come in response to her faith. If she calls the shot, and she takes the action. So until next Wednesday morning, remember, I'm here to help you on your journey from the cross to spiritual maturity. Now have a great week in Jesus, and God bless.